Wow. I'm really excited about talking to you,
Oh,
Rahti.
thank you.
It's fantastic to have you on the show. So,
Likewise.
so I want to start off by asking
You on
you
the show.
a little bit about where it all started. Did you always want to go into theatre acting from a young age?
Oh, yes. I remember the fantasy I had, I think at 4 years of age on a one of these, rocking horses with springs in the back of my father's veterinary clinic. We lived in the back, and I was just having a fantasy about a lot of people looking at me and applauding. And I just remember that fantasy, and something in me was like, this is what you're going for. It was
Mm.
very weird at 4 years of age. It was confirmed for me a few times over the course of my childhood, and it was just no, there was no question in my mind. That's what I wanted to do. Yeah.
And how did it manifest itself through your school years? Did you get involved in acting?
Oh, yeah, I sure did. I got involved in acting, and I grew up in New Haven, which made me a townie. Yale University really is what New Haven is known for.
Mm.
And as a townie, the Yale Drama School was really renowned and still is. I would kind of press my face up against the glass of the Yale Dramat, and I, I, I was a very nervy little thing. I managed to insinuate myself into actual productions and created a position for myself as the company apprentice for the first season of the Yale Summer Cabaret, which has been going on probably for almost, well, 45 years or so.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yeah. And that was a that was a seminal moment also being that company apprentice. There was a company of 8 actors, including
Mm.
Meryl Streep and Christine Estabrook, and they were not yet famous. They were still in school, but I remember the awe I had of these people.
Mm.
And I remember once, it's so funny to remember this story. Meryl Streep and Marcel Rosenblatt, another
Mm.
wonderful actress, but of course, last name Rosenblatt, also was not a tall blonde goddess, but probably an incredible actress who actually on interviews Meryl refers to as an inspiration. Uh, at a break, they all went to Ann Taylor on Chapel Street and they said, "Oh, come, come." And they were like these little girls shopping, and I was with them, and I felt terrified that they were treating me like a human being. I was just so, I felt so scared, and like I didn't want to make them, didn't want to say anything wrong. I bought a pair of really ugly gray stretchy pants just to feel like part of the gang, you know. I was 16 at that point. Yeah.
Wow, wow. So you graduated from high school,
Yeah.
and so tell us about where you went from there.
Well, I was in a hurry. I
Mm.
graduated a year early. I got into NYU graduate acting, which at that time was a conservatory that accepted undergrads, and I got out of there in 3 years. If I was smart, what I would say to my younger self is just stay one more year and get your master's. But I was in a hurry. I could have taught, I could have done all, but I was in a hurry to be shot out of the cannon into the great white way. And uh, that was a real humbling experience. They didn't really prepare you for the business. They taught you how to do your craft, but business and whatever you do for a living are two very different things.
They are, they are.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate all of that?
How did I navigate all of that? Well, uh, not well.
Mm.
I did not have the tools emotionally to
Mm.
navigate any of it. And it was the 70s, and I was a libidinous little thing. So I was blown around, between men. And also, this was way before Me Too. And,
Mm.
I got my SAG card under questionable circumstances. I mean, I could have a few heads on posts if I wanted to, but They're old men now, and I see no reason to drag them through social media.
Yeah,
But it was not a fun time. I actually
yeah.
ended up in a nunnery. I mean, I'm Jewish, so it wasn't a nunnery, it was an ashram. It was, I ended up moving to, well, a Hindu kibbutz is what I like to call it, if you will, in Pennsylvania to get some tools to reparent myself and get some spiritual grounding.
Gosh. Gosh, and that and where did you having spent time there, what happened next? Where did you where were you when you came out of that program?
Well, yeah, I like to say I'm one of the few people ever to be kicked out of a cult. I find that to be a very
Much
I
honor.
love that distinction. Yes, I was questioning the word of the guru a little too much, and they told me to take a leave of absence for a while, so I did. And I had learned what I needed to learn there, which was that first of all, company is stronger than will,
Mm,
that you don't do anything alone.
yeah.
Also, that I am not what I do. I was so over identified with being an actress. Well,
Mm,
actor is what we say now. I was so over identified with being an actor, I didn't know who I was. And they didn't care that I was
mm,
an actor. It was really a process of reparenting, of
yeah.
experiencing unconditional love and learning some actual trades.
Mm,
When I came out, I became a private cook. I was trained in macrobiotic cooking and some nutrition, and I ended up getting a lot of gigs cooking for jazz musicians. And without realizing it, that was my first business. I had a nice dossier of clients and renowned, jazz people who kind of recommended me to each other. And I've got fun name dropping stories to tell about that, but I'll leave that for another time.
wow. So what's interesting is I see that the fact that you say you got kicked out of a cult, you're clearly a very, very a free spirit. So the entrepreneurial streak was there really all the way through. I
Oh,
see.
yeah. I have no business working for someone else. It's not good for anybody. I've
Mm,
tried. I mean, even
mm,
and even as a cook, I wasn't working for someone else. I had clients. I
yeah,
had my own business.
yeah, yeah. So how long did you you eventually left that business, but how did it evolve? What happened?
Well, I continued to be a cook for about 7 years, and in that time, I also started to hone my chops as a stand-up comic. I was admitted to a program called the Manhattan Punchline Comedy Corps. Manhattan Punchline was a very well-known off-Broadway theater at the time, and so I began doing stand-up because while I am an actress who sings, I'm not a singer who acts, and the paths that seemed viable back then in the 80s where you could either be Barbara Streisand, go on Broadway, or you could be Jerry Seinfeld, and get a sitcom. So I went the comedy route and I got so far as to actually book gigs around the East Coast, which is, I met my husband through comedy, actually. He'd been doing it longer and we were like the king and queen of Pennsylvania. I would open and he would headline, or I would middle and he'd been doing it twice as long as me. And it was a rough go because when he had a good set and I didn't, that was hard on the relationship and
So
vice
you met
versa.
through you met through the whole stand-up show.
Yeah, he was a regular at the Improv,
Hmm.
the original Improv in New York City, and he was hanging out at the bar, and I kind of sidled up, and I was like, "Good set," And I talked about how I'm a macrobiotic cook, and you tell a man you're a cook, that's your hook. If you're a heterosexual woman, talked about how well talked about how I was earning a living at the time. So I would say as a stand up, I got to a point where I was doing, pretty much half my income was through comedy. Yeah.
Wow, wow. So where did that go? And there's a couple of interesting things there that working together that you quite a few people I interview are part of a couple who work together,
Yeah.
and you experienced that. So,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And we also, in our attempt to become the next Stiller and Mira, we actually did a show together. We wrote and developed a show together called Oh Grow Up, and which we did sketches, and we also did shtick or comedy, stand up, monologue, and that was an interesting time.
so that,
And yeah,
so working with your husband, that was your first experience of a partnership.
yeah, that I guess you're right. That was my first. Well, no, I'd had other partnerships. I was part of a little improv troupe for a while, and
Mm,
like I said, I had learned from the ashram, you don't do anything alone. I started forming support groups around myself. So, I had accountability partners as an actor.
mm,
There was a program actually started by Jay Perry, who is a very renowned coach in the
mm.
industry now, called the Actors Information Project. And I was part of a group where we'd hold each other accountable. All right, I'm sending out 7 resumes this week. I'm going to go all this many casting directors. So I didn't try to do anything alone after the ashram, quite frankly.
I think that there's certain careers where you acting in some ways is a little bit like the entrepreneur's journey in that you're on your own a
Mhm.
lot of the time, and you
And yet it's
need
a social art. It's a social
yeah,
art. You can't do it alone.
exactly. So you really do need partners
Yeah.
to interact with, to hold you accountable. So yeah. Tell me other ways that so you're partnering with your husband, and what happened what happened with the stand up?
With the what? The stand up?
What happened with the stand
It
up program?
faded. I would
Right.
say that it started to fade because, Comedy Central, beginning of cable, the market became saturated. I would say, it just was not, we were not getting the traction that I think we needed to get. And
Mm,
also, I think both of us were too fragile for that industry. I didn't understand why everybody thought it was so brave at the time I started doing it, just go up and be yourself. It's easier it's easier than creating a character, but actually, no, because if there's no fourth wall,
mm,
people thought that comedy was actually more like going to the Coliseum. Sometimes people in the audience thought it was their job to heckle
mm.
and not let you do your act. And for us, we neither of us were great at handling that. Uh, yeah. So, and I also started getting sick of having to always go for the laugh
Mm.
when actually I'm probably a person who comes out of a rather serious background with a lot of post generational trauma. And I actually I moved away. The stand up comedy is a skill that served me as a playwright. I
Mm.
started writing plays. I first started solo plays. I did a one woman show and eventually started writing plays with other people in them
Mm.
and found that collaboration was really rewarding. Developing new work with people, whether it was as an actor or a playwright, seeing, co-creating a world with other people was really fed me. Really, I loved it.
Did you come from like a family of did you come from a creative family?
I've been told that an uncle of mine generations ago was a cantor
Right.
in Russia,
Right.
but not to my knowledge.
What did your parents do?
Well, my father was a veterinarian,
Right.
uh, and my mother actually was an organizational psychologist in France at a time when very few women uh, had a career like like that. And it was the 50s. she married my father, and they met on. He had an internship with her father. Her father was a veterinarian in a little town called, I think, Arras du Pin, where in France, where they had the equivalent of steeplechase, Pain Arras, which he treated the racehorses, made him a very important guy, veterinarian wise. And my father, after the war, World War II, interned with him, and in France, it's I believe it is the daughter follows the mother's religion and the son follows the father's religion. So he was Catholic, which is why she survived World War II. And my father was Jewish, and so my grandfather, my father's very charming. My grandfather loved him. He introduced him to my mother, said she's Jewish too.
So you grew up in France?
No, I didn't. I kind of wish I had. Raising bilingual kids, I think, is doesn't just happen naturally. And my parents, as I said, were both very damaged by the war and did not have the wherewithal to, raise us in a way that was where we spoke both languages. Again, I think there has to be an agreement where one parent only speaks one language, the other parent only speaks the other language, and that's it. And they would use French to talk behind our backs if they didn't want us to understand something. What a great way for children not to grow up bilingually.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
sorry, Mom, Dad, you blew that one.
So you grew up in New York, yeah?
I grew up in Connecticut, an hour and a half away, in New Haven, as I said, but I moved
Sorry,
here
you did
when
tell
I
me. You
was,
did tell me.
yeah, but I'm a New Yorker. My father was born in Brooklyn. My husband was born in Brooklyn. My son was born in third generation Brooklyn boy, and I moved here when I was 17. So yeah, I'm a New Yorker.
Right. So I'm really interested to hear about your coaching business and how that came about on the back of acting, on the back of stand up, on the back of cookery.
Yes,
So
cookery.
how did you pivot into coaching?
As well, as I said, I learned a lot of tools from the ashram, and started creating these accountability books, groups, and started voraciously reading self-help books like Julia Cameron's The Artist Way and Barbara Sher's Wishcraft. And of course, Barbara Sher's all about success teams.
Yeah.
And I used those tools to facilitate these groups.
Mm.
People started getting results. I have a friend, I started with friends as my guinea pigs, and they weren't guinea pigs. I didn't realize I was going to be a professional at the moment, but one friend opened a bookstore. That was a dream of hers on Lexington Avenue, no less. Another moved up to Maine and became a DJ. And by then I was married to my husband and struggling with a lot of not just the cooking. I was moving away from that, but I was also doing temp work in corporate settings. That was not good. I was teaching yoga. I was doing 50 things, as many actors do, and plate spinning to survive. And my husband said, you're good at this, whatever facilitating thing, and you could make money at that, I bet. You should do that. And that was, again, the second bell that went off. My husband knowing me well enough.
Mm.
And I think that's the thing about partnership too. When you develop a trusting one, people know you, they see your gifts, and they can amplify them. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll put a shingle out. And back then, I don't think you need to be certified to this day as a coach. I bet back then it was real nervy, but then again, I do have some nerve, and I started charging money. And at a certain point, I realized, I'm referring an awful lot of people to therapy. And I feel it's not always when they necessarily need a therapist. It's just that I have no clue how to get to help them any more than I have. So at that point, I decided I'm getting some training. And that's when I went for certification as a coach. And then my business blew up through another partnership, which was with a business coach.
Oh, right. So tell me about that.
Well, she took me from, about 19K to 100K. It took
Wow.
about, I would say it took about 5 years. It wasn't, a lot of coaches say, well, I can double your income. I can get you to six figures in a year. Maybe they can. I don't know. But I
Mm,
know working with Monica Shaw, who's the
mm.
coach of Revenue Breakthrough, whew, talk about tools. The woman is, they call her the queen of content for a reason. And she gave me structures and she gave me, systems
Mm.
and ways to work with mindset. And yeah, it just took off. My business really took off at that point. So that eventually, I had a full practice. I still have a full practice. Yeah.
And your practice, just tell us a little bit about what your practice focuses on. What is the kind of problem you focus on fixing?
Well, I think, at first you coach what you know. So in
Mm,
other words, you kind of coach yourself.
yeah,
And I feel as though really I got to know myself better and better, and my own challenges better and better. I ended at this point, my niche, if you
mm.
will, are creative professionals who feel pulled in 50 directions.
Like yourself, like your own background.
Exactly. And specifically, I got a certification as an ADHD coach, which turned out to be really fortuitous. A coach of mine recommended that program. For a time, I didn't think I wanted to coach people with ADD. But then I realized, it turns out my son has it, my husband has it. And little did I know that my older brother was diagnosed with it. I didn't know that as a kid. So it was, as they say in Yiddish, beschert, meant to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So and how did your how did your client base grow?
Well, I started out creating groups, first with groups, which was a little backwards, through a wonderful listserv called Park Slope Parents, which is pretty well known in the listserv world. I started coaching entrepreneurial moms. So that was another kind of test group.
Mm.
Uh, Out of there, eventually, I had to do practicums to get my certification. So I started coaching people that I didn't know at all. And uh, eventually, I built a website. I decided on some rates. I think at first I was charging like $35 a session or $25 a session. And I remember the first private session, the person didn't show up.
Oh dear.
They
We've
didn't
all had
show
that.
up.
We've all
Yeah.
had that.
Yes, but that was like, oh my God, this is never gonna work. I'm fooling myself, but I didn't stop. That's the key. You feel like a fraud and keep going. That's the key.
Yeah.
I could write another book called "You Feel Like a Fraud and Keep Going," and you just don't quit. And eventually, it stuck. People started actually hiring me and showing up.
Do you remember the moment that the business started to blow up?
Actually, yes. My coach Monica at the time is also a healer, and she uses a modality called theta healing, actually. But she was a psychic from a very young age. She saw things other people didn't see, and I had a real block against going above 3-month commitments, getting people to stay with me for longer than 3 months. I had a real block against charging more than I was charging, and I was not going to make a living running my business the way I was. And she actually did a past life regression with me, and where I pinpointed some issues around shame and visibility, for good reason, if I'm to believe this past life visualization. I was, I was summarily executed, basically. And a week after she did this clearing with me, and she convinced me to ask for a 6-month commitment. A week later, I had my first 6-month client, and I had basically upped, not quite doubled my price, but I had risen it it had gone up significantly. I would say within the course of 6 weeks, I filled my practice with 6-month clients. So the subconscious is a very powerful thing. You know, that's when it took off.
Yeah. And it was having the accountability partner that you yourself had created that system with actors, and you have that now backing you.
And also accountability partner with a coach. Yeah, that's the mother of all accountability partners. You're
Correct.
paying them a lot of money. You
Yeah.
want to be accountable to them.
Yeah. And as you grew, did you have other partnerships that you formed?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Um, uh, I have done events. I co-created an event with a marketing branding expert who's a friend of mine, and a woman who is a IP coach. Uh, what is it? IPO. I'm having a
Yeah,
brain
intellectual
thing.
property. Yeah, yeah.
Intellectual property lawyer. So, the three of us created an event together, where we invited everybody from our lists, and we each presented and had a nice little cocktail spread. That was the first sort of, I mean, a joint venture a lot of times is people think of it as being like an online exchange, but this was live. That was the
Yeah,
first.
well, it's a bit. Many of us have a short memory, but that's how joint ventures often looked before COVID, and many of us are going back to that now. Actually,
Yes, I love live events. I do. Uh, and since then, yeah, I've done trades with people. I can't remember specifically, but they've interviewed me, and then I might interview them. Even on social, doing these little things where on Facebook, I interviewed a friend of mine who's he has a music school,
Mhm.
and then he's been supportive of me and promoted my stuff. So yeah, isolation doesn't work. You've got to get out there, and meet people, and you just and it's not direct. As Monica used to say, networking karma is indirect. It's not quid pro quo. I've helped people, I've gotten out there, and things have come back to me, but not from them.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely. It's like you throw a boomerang in one direction, and a
that's
boomerang
right.
comes back from another direction.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, and I've
Yeah.
actually started a networking group, modeled on one that I think that we both belong to, JVMM. And actually, I did it because I belong to a lot of networking groups where the target market is not mine. For
Mm.
instance, coaches who coach other coaches, that's not my target market. So I realized, well, if I want to get referral partnerships happening, I've got to start a networking group with people who share my niche. So I started Muse Networking.
Mm.
Muse, Marketing United serves everyone.
Mm.
And it is a network for people who serve creatives. So for like an intellectual property lawyer, or perhaps a branding expert, or a bookkeeper who works with a lot of entrepreneurs and creative types. So that is slowly building, and I think there's going to be a lot of fun exchange going on there.
That's great. And I think creatives really do have a need for partnerships.
Oh yeah,
It's they thrive on on interaction with others.
absolutely. Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
I think COVID must have been quite challenging. No,
Actually,
very
that
difficult.
was a boom
Well,
time for me. Strangely,
mm,
I think because of the isolation that was imposed on everyone. Also, people who were making a living in the arts
mm,
suddenly, I mean, people were very creative using Zoom.
yeah.
However, for instance, I had an actor who was a Broadway actor hired me, and the playing field was suddenly very level because there was no theater. he
Of
was having
course.
a hard time really getting a foothold. He'd come, he'd done pretty well. He'd understudied in very big shows that are still running and gone on occasionally, but he wanted his own lead in a Broadway show.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget when they came to their first session, they had a glass of wine in their hand. That's how bad it had gotten. The
Yeah.
poor guy, he had let himself get very hirsute, a lot of fur on his face and a glass of wine. Poor fellow. So, yeah, all of a sudden I had a lot of clients because people had to think they were by
Mm.
themselves in their four walls and they had to reassess, what am I doing with my life?
Right.
Especially in the creative professions, I think.
How fascinating. And tell me altogether, who are the people? Tell me about some of the sorts of people you're working with at the moment.
Oh, goodness, there's a wonderful, exciting range of people. I have a ball. I
Right.
have an author who has had some success, and now, of course, she's been paid an advance for the next novel, and that can be very daunting
Mm.
for a writer. Uh, so we're working together to get her to crank that thing out. The whole, I think sophomore slump, or that feeling of people expect a certain thing from me, can be very blocking. So I'm
Mm.
also trained as a creativity coach. So a lot of the work has been to get her to let it flow again.
Hmm.
She doesn't really have she doesn't have a problem with the business so much, but for her, it's about getting it to flow, letting herself make a mess and create, the vomit draft, if you will, and let the work on the characters and all. Then I have clients who I have a musician who wants to make a living as a musician, done pretty well for himself as an entrepreneur, and now he wants to actually start building income through that. Um, oh golly, filmmakers. I get a lot of filmmakers, of course, talk about collaborative. Um, and also I'm starting to get mentees, which is fun. People who are starting their own coaching practice, and I've really enjoyed that. Helping, people at that stage. And I'll talk to anybody for 20 minutes. I get people calling me out of the blue, people who are going through their training or they just graduated and they want to know how I built my practice. And I'll give them 20 minutes and we'll talk. And then I'll say, okay, if you want to have another conversation, we're going to have to come up with an agreement. I'll be your mentor coach, but not for free. People will shoplift if you
Yes,
let them.
they will. They will. They
That's
will.
what that's what
I
picking
just
your
wrote.
brain is,
I just wrote actually, I just wrote an email today about how in my early days of public speaking, I had this idea that if you give away all your best ideas, people want to work with you. And of course, what happened is people furiously wrote notes, and then they walked away, and I never heard from them again because they said, "Great,
Yeah.
great, we've had everything we need. And that was it." So yeah, I'd like to just end our conversation and ask you really, to our audience who really want to understand more about how they can benefit from partnerships, what's your main what would be your piece of advice for them?
Get out of the house. COVID
Mm.
is over. Get out of the house. Go to a networking event and don't expect anything. Come up with tiny goals like, I'm going to get at least 3 business cards.
Mm.
I'm going to learn about one person's childhood.
Yeah,
Fun goals that take the focus off yourself.
and on them exactly.
That
That's
is,
very good
yeah,
advice.
yeah.
It's very good advice because I think I find often the personal questions you get a we'll have to record that again. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
So, yeah. So, what I'd like to do is, I'd like to just end the show by just asking you, what would be your main takeaway uh, to our audience about how they might benefit from partnerships.
From partnerships, yeah. Well, first you have to form them,
Yes.
and one way to do it is to get out of the house,
Mm.
go to networking events, live ones, because COVID is over. Get out of the house, especially if things aren't going well. That's something Monica said. If all else fails, leave your house. And when you do go to networking events, put the focus on the other guy, as they say in Meisner acting technique. Come up with little goals like I'm going to get at least 3 business cards, or better yet, I'm going to learn about at least one person's childhood. Things that real, or I'm going to give one person a solution to a problem. Come up with fun goals that have nothing to do with you. I mean, the business card one, that has to do with you, and it's not a very interesting one. The second two, though, that's where you might actually start sparking a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is that I think when you ask people questions about themselves, it's not just about business.
Yeah,
It takes the pressure off. You actually discover who they are as people, which is quite important.
that's right. Yeah.
Because you need to like somebody in order to work with them.
Hmm.
But it creates a much more relaxing environment for you to open up to each other. And
Absolutely.
so I want if our audience want to find out more about you, where should they go?
Right now, I'm all about the book I just had published. I finally had a book published, which is very exciting, and it's called The 5 Emotions That Stop Success. Of course, it's published by Routledge, which is an academic press, so they have to get every keyword in the title. The full title is The 5 Emotions That Stop Success in Coaches, Clients, and Creatives Overcoming Personal Obstacles of the Mind. But I just call it the 5 Emotions That Stop Success. And you can go to the5emotions.com, one word, where you can get the book at, I think, a 30% discount, at least 20% or 30% discount. And once you purchase the book, you can download my Passion to Profit workbook for free, which will give you a little scaffolding around fulfilling goals of your own. That's a nice, cheap way to get a taste of me.
And of course, you can also access all of that in the show notes, which you can watch alongside this show. So, Rahti,
Absolutely.
thank you very much. I found it a truly fascinating discussion with you. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you, Danny. I had a great time. Always fun to talk about yourself.
It is. So, I'm Danny Bermant, founder of CaptainJV.co, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of The Power of Two. For more information about us, go to www.captainjv.co.